The gavel echoed through the federal courtroom as I handed District Judge Richardson the final piece of evidence that would destroy Patricia Blackwood forever. Then my phone lit up with an alert that made my heart stop. There she was on my security feed, the HOA president herself, smashing through my cabin's front window with a tire iron. Glass exploded across my grandfather's handmade wooden floors as she climbed inside. Judge Richardson leaned over to watch the live feed. "Is this happening right now?" he whispered. Patricia had no clue that federal agents were positioned in the woods around my property. No idea the judge was watching her commit felony breaking and entering in real time. And she definitely didn't know that her 2-year reign of terror against military families was about to land her in federal prison for the next decade. Sometimes justice has perfect timing. What would you do if you caught your HOA president burglarizing your home while you were in federal court building a case against them? Let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I guarantee some of you have dealt with HOA dictators too. My name is David Chen, and 8 months ago I thought I'd won the lottery. After 25 years as a Navy communications specialist and a decent settlement from a service-connected injury, I took early retirement to restore my late uncle's fishing cabin in Clearwater Springs, Colorado. The property had been in our family since 1962. Rough-hewn logs weathered silver by mountain storms, a stone chimney that drew perfectly, and 40 acres of pine forest that smelled like freedom itself. Morning coffee never tasted better than it did on that wraparound porch, steam rising from my mug while elk grazed in the meadow below. Pure sanctuary. My wife, Lisa, loved the idea of turning it into a retreat for veteran families dealing with PTSD. Our twin boys, both 16, claimed the loft rooms overlooking the valley where eagles nested in the towering pines. Then I encountered Patricia Blackwood. Picture a woman who wielded a leather briefcase like Thor's hammer and drove a black Mercedes so spotless it looked like she detailed it hourly. Patricia had ruled the Clearwater Springs HOA for 8 years, owned the largest property management company in 3 counties, and possessed the kind of razor-sharp features that seemed permanently frozen in judgment. The afternoon she introduced herself, her expensive perfume clashed violently with the pine-scented mountain air, somehow making even nature smell artificial around her. "Welcome to Clearwater Springs," she said, though her tone suggested I was about as welcome as a grease fire. "I trust you'll acquaint yourself with our community covenants." Community covenants. That should have been my first warning sign. 4 weeks later, I received my baptism into Patricia's version of mountain living. A certified letter arrived on paper so thick and official-looking, it felt like parchment between my fingers. Inside, a $2,000 fine for unpermitted structural modifications. The violation: my uncle's tool shed built in 1968. Recent aerial surveys have identified non-compliant outbuildings on your property, Patricia explained when I called, her manicured nails clicking against her desk like ice picks. All structures require current HOA approval regardless of their age. Here's what made this completely insane. The Clearwater Springs HOA wasn't established until 1981. My uncle's shed predated their entire organization by 13 years. I had the original construction receipts, county permits, even photographs of him teaching me woodworking in that shed when I was 12 years old. You'd assume presenting documentary evidence would resolve everything, right? Think again. I showed up to the next HOA meeting loaded with proof. The community hall reeked of burnt coffee and industrial disinfectant, harsh fluorescent lights buzzing overhead while maybe 20 people sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs. I spread out the photographs, the permits, the timeline proving my shed was grandfathered in beyond question. Patricia barely acknowledged my evidence. "Grandfathered structures require historical preservation fees," she announced like she was reading stock prices. $750 quarterly for heritage structure maintenance assessments. $3,000 annually for a perfectly legal shed that had stood for decades. But here's what really got my attention. During the meeting, I noticed whispered conversations from other residents that stopped cold whenever Patricia glanced their way. An elderly neighbor named Frank quietly mentioned he'd seen similar harassment targeting other veteran families. After the meeting, I investigated. 4 military families had faced escalating violations in the past 18 months. 3 had been forced to sell. Coincidentally, all 3 sales were handled by Blackwood Property Management. The diesel fumes from the parking lot mixed with my growing suspicion as I sat in my truck afterward. This wasn't about shed compliance or community standards. This was about pushing out veterans, and I was about to discover just how deep that rabbit hole went. Here's something I wish I'd understood then. When an HOA suddenly discovers violations on properties owned by people from specific backgrounds, you're not dealing with paperwork problems. You're dealing with systematic discrimination, and discrimination against veterans can become a federal crime faster than you might imagine. 3 weeks after that community meeting, Patricia escalated her campaign. She appeared at my cabin unannounced on a Wednesday morning, clipboard in hand, accompanied by someone she introduced as Mike, supposedly a state building inspector. The stench of stale cigarettes and cheap cologne announced their arrival before they reached my door. Mike looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, constantly checking Patricia's expression, like a nervous subordinate awaiting orders. His state inspector badge hung askew on a shirt that had seen better decades. "Mandatory safety inspection," Patricia declared, pushing past me without invitation. "We've received numerous complaints about fire hazards near your propane storage." Numerous complaints from whom? I was the only person living on this property. I followed them around my cabin, watching Mike point at completely legal propane connections, the kind specifically designed for mountain properties with backup heating systems. Every time he hesitated, Patricia would clear her throat and tap her pen against that leather briefcase. The sharp clicking sound made my jaw clench involuntarily. "This connection violates current safety codes," Mike mumbled, photographing a propane line that was actually 5 feet beyond code requirements and completely up to specification. I'd installed it myself using my Navy technical training. "And this fire pit," Patricia added with theatrical alarm, gesturing toward my uncle's fieldstone circle, "appears to be completely unpermitted." I nearly burst out laughing. Unpermitted? It was a ring of mountain stones my uncle had arranged by hand in the 1960s. I had photographs of 4 generations of our family roasting marshmallows around those same rocks, but Patricia wasn't interested in family history. The violation list multiplied like cancer cells. $2,000 for propane non-compliance, $1,800 for the unpermitted recreational fire feature, $1,500 for failure to maintain adequate structural safety standards, plus $400 monthly monitoring fees to ensure ongoing compliance. Total financial damage, $5,300, with $400 bleeding out every month thereafter. That night, sleep was impossible. The injustice burned in my gut like acid. So I did what any former Navy communications specialist would do. I researched everything. Colorado requires all building inspectors to maintain state certification, with licenses publicly searchable through the Department of Regulatory Agencies. Mike's name appeared nowhere in their database, but Mike Stevens, property management associate at Blackwood Properties? Bingo. My father always taught me that when people try to cheat you, they usually get careless. Turns out fake building inspectors leave digital footprints just like everyone else. I'd learned that lesson working with contractors during my Navy years. Always verify credentials before allowing someone authority over your property. I filed a complaint with the state licensing board first thing Thursday morning. Then I got tactical. Every future interaction with Patricia would happen via documented channels. No more phone calls where she could deny statements or twist my words later. But Patricia's psychological warfare was just beginning. Within days, anonymous noise complaints appeared about my restoration work, completely legal work happening between approved daytime hours. Fresh parking restrictions materialized overnight, with signs positioned to make accessing my property as inconvenient as possible. The sound of Patricia's heels clicking on asphalt became my early warning system. She'd cruise the neighborhood like a patrol officer, always carrying that leather briefcase, always photographing something. That's when I made the decision that changed everything. Security cameras. I installed a comprehensive system covering my driveway, the shed, and the public areas where Patricia conducted her surveillance operations. The first week of footage was better than Christmas morning. There was Patricia, 10:30 p.m. on a Friday, measuring my shed with Mike holding a flashlight. They photographed it from multiple angles, clearly building additional violation cases. But what made my blood run cold was realizing they weren't just targeting my property. I watched them perform identical late-night inspections at 4 other houses, all owned by military families. 2 weeks of surveillance revealed the pattern. Patricia's black Mercedes made regular midnight stops at veteran-owned properties. She'd photograph, measure, and document during hours when she assumed no one was watching. Wait until you hear what happened when I enhanced the audio on one particularly clear recording. Patricia stood in my driveway at 11:45 p.m., phone pressed to her ear. The Chen property should be simple, she told someone on the other end. These military types always break under sustained financial pressure. A few more violations, and he'll be desperate to sell below market rate. The lingering exhaust smell from her Mercedes mixed with the scent of evidence. I had footage of systematic harassment, fraudulent inspections, and discriminatory targeting based on veteran status. Time to turn the tables. Armed with evidence of Patricia's midnight surveillance network, I thought I had her cornered. I was dead wrong. Instead of retreating, she launched a full-scale legal assault. The certified letter arrived on premium law firm letterhead, thick embossed paper designed to make recipients' hands shake when opening it. Cease and desist all unauthorized activities, screamed across the top in bold letters that seemed to jump off the page. The threat was unmistakable. Pay $9,200 in accumulated fines within 30 days, or face a lien on my property. Not only had my original violations supposedly grown through compounding daily penalties, but they'd added new charges for ongoing non-compliance and failure to respond to official HOA communications. The smell of expensive ink and legal intimidation filled my kitchen as I read every threatening word twice. But something felt suspicious about the entire document. The law firm, Morrison & Associates, had a Denver address, but when I searched online, their website looked like it was designed in 2004 and abandoned shortly after. That afternoon, I drove to the county courthouse, a sandstone building that reeked of decades of bureaucracy and floor polish. I'd spent enough years dealing with military contracts to know that legitimate legal threats leave verifiable paper trails. In the basement records room, surrounded by the musty smell of archived files, I found what I was looking for. The original HOA formation documents from 1981. As I photographed page after page with my phone, sneezing from the dust, I discovered something fascinating. The current CCRs, those covenants, conditions, and restrictions that supposedly gave Patricia all this power, were drastically different from the original documents. Significant changes had been implemented over the years, including the creation of the Historical Preservation Assessment, that was costing me $750 quarterly. But here's what made my pulse quicken. Those amendments required approval from 80% of homeowners. I found meeting minutes, voting records, even signed proxy statements. Most of Patricia's rule changes had been passed by slim majorities, often with less than half the community even participating. My uncle had taught me to read legal documents carefully during his construction business days. The devil hides in the fine print, he used to say, and the angels live in the original signatures. Turns out invalid rule changes are just expensive paper when they reach federal court. But my investigation was about to uncover something much more sinister. I started contacting the displaced veteran families, the ones who'd been forced to sell under Patricia's harassment campaigns. Robert Martinez, an Afghanistan veteran, had been driven out 8 months earlier. Identical playbook, Robert told me over coffee at a diner that smelled like bacon grease and broken dreams. Started with shed violations, then propane complaints, then suddenly I'm facing 15 grand in fines for a deck my brother-in-law built in 1998. Robert's voice cracked slightly. Sold for $220,000 just to escape the legal nightmare. 4 months later, Patricia's company flipped it for $380,000. The pattern was becoming crystal clear. Identify a veteran family, manufacture violations, escalate fines until financial pressure forces a below-market sale, resell through Patricia's property network for massive profits. I filed complaints with the State Real Estate Commission documenting the conflict of interest between Patricia's HOA enforcement and her property sales empire. But she wasn't waiting for regulatory investigations. My mailbox got spray-painted with troublemaker in red letters that looked like dried blood against the white metal. Anonymous notes appeared under my windshield wipers. Military types ruin family neighborhoods, and some people never learn when they're not wanted. The psychological warfare was devastating my family. The twins started asking if we could move back to town. Lisa would flinch every time a car door slammed in our driveway. The peaceful retreat we'd planned was becoming a war zone. But the final escalation came when I discovered someone had attempted to break into my cabin. I was in town buying supplies when my security system sent an alert to my phone. The footage showed Patricia's black Mercedes parked at the end of our road, engine running like a getaway vehicle. Someone had approached my back door. The camera angle didn't capture who, but fresh scratches around the deadbolt and disturbed gravel told the story clearly. They tried to enter my home. That night, reviewing the footage with Lisa, we both noticed something terrifying. The attempted break-in occurred precisely during hours when Patricia knew I'd be away, information she could only have obtained by systematically monitoring my daily routines. "This isn't about money anymore," Lisa whispered, her voice barely audible. "This is personal." She was absolutely right, but what Patricia didn't realize was that her escalating harassment had attracted the attention of someone with real power to stop her permanently. 4 days after the attempted break-in, Patricia deployed her nuclear option. A notice appeared in every mailbox around Clearwater Springs, cheap paper with smudged printing that betrayed the rushed, desperate nature of her plan. Emergency HOA meeting addressing disruptive residents threatening community safety. The meeting was scheduled for Tuesday at 1 p.m., middle of a workday when most reasonable people would be at their jobs. The agenda was buried in legal jargon, but the message was transparent. They wanted to vote on foreclosing my property for pattern of violations endangering community welfare. I spent Monday night reaching out to every neighbor I could trust, making discreet phone calls after Lisa and the boys went to bed. Those whispered conversations painted a disturbing picture. Frank, the elderly man who lived 3 doors down, revealed something that made my stomach drop. "My son Paul, God rest his soul, went through identical harassment before he passed," he said, his voice trembling over the phone. "Vietnam veteran, Purple Heart recipient. They claimed his workshop violated noise ordinances, said his flagpole was too tall for community standards. The stress..." He couldn't finish the sentence. Paul had died of a massive stroke 7 months into his fight with Patricia. Tuesday arrived with the kind of gray Colorado sky that feels heavy with approaching storms. The community hall reeked of industrial cleanser and bitter coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead like angry insects. Folding chairs were arranged to minimize seating, a deliberate attempt to suppress attendance. 14 people showed up out of 45 homeowners. Patricia had stacked the audience with her supporters: Mike, 3 property managers from her company, and several residents who'd received mysterious fine reductions the previous week. "Thank you all for coming to address this critical matter," Patricia began, standing behind a podium like she was delivering a presidential address. Her presentation slides looked professionally produced. Too professional for an emergency community meeting. She'd prepared an entire show, aerial photographs of my property with red circles around alleged violations, charts showing declining property values in our section, testimonials from concerned residents about my aggressive behavior and disruptive construction activities. But the most damaging slide made my blood boil. It showed a photograph of me in my Navy dress uniform from the twins' school career day, overlaid with text reading, "Military training, asset or liability in family communities." The implication was crystal clear. Veterans were inherently dangerous. "Studies indicate that military personnel often struggle with civilian reintegration," Patricia continued, her voice taking on a concerned, almost pitying tone. "While we appreciate their service, we must prioritize the safety and stability of our families." I sat in the back row, legally recording everything on my phone. Colorado's one-party consent law was about to become very important. Every discriminatory word, every fabricated claim, every violation of my civil rights was being documented in high definition. When Patricia called for community input, 4 neighbors spoke in my defense. Tom Williams, a retired firefighter, testified that I'd helped repair his fence after the spring windstorm. Margaret Foster mentioned my volunteer work with the local American Legion. Even quiet Mrs. Patterson stood up to say my restoration work was bringing character back to our mountain community. But Patricia had prepared for dissent. She produced a folder of witness statements, typed documents claiming I'd threatened board members, disturbed the peace with loud power tools at inappropriate hours, and made suspicious modifications to my property that could endanger neighbors. I recognized Mike's signature on 3 statements. The others were signed by people who'd received those mysterious fine reductions. "If we don't act decisively," Patricia declared, her voice rising to practiced hysteria, "we'll face lawsuits from other homeowners for failing to maintain community standards. Property values will collapse. Families will be forced to relocate." The vote was predetermined through parliamentary manipulation. They excluded my vote as the subject of enforcement action, counted abstentions as supporting foreclosure, and rushed the process before anyone could raise procedural objections. 9 votes for foreclosure, 5 against. But here's what Patricia didn't know. My phone had captured something beyond her fabricated evidence and procedural violations. During a brief recess, thinking the recording had stopped, she'd leaned over to Mike and whispered something that would change everything. Military people destroy neighborhoods. Everyone understands that. Once we remove the Chens and that Garcia family, we can market this as a premium family community. No more PTSD cases or government dependency issues. The room felt dead silent after the vote, like the moment before lightning strikes. I stood up slowly, phone still recording. I appreciate everyone's time today, I said calmly. I'll be challenging this decision through appropriate legal channels naturally, but I want you all to understand discrimination against veterans is a federal crime, and everything said here today is now part of an official record. Patricia's face went pale, but she recovered quickly. Empty threats won't change a lawful vote, Mr. Chen. As I walked toward the exit, Frank quietly pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand. Written in shaky handwriting was a phone number and 5 words. Call her. She can help. The phone number Frank gave me led to the most important conversation of my life. David, this is Judge Rebecca Martinez. Frank told me you might call. I nearly dropped my coffee mug. Frank's quiet neighbor had connected me to a federal district judge, his daughter-in-law. Judge, I appreciate you taking my call, but I'm not certain this rises to federal level. Stop right there, she interrupted, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being heard. I've been tracking HOA discrimination patterns across Colorado for the past 16 months. Your case isn't isolated, Mr. Chen. It's part of something much larger. That Thursday morning, I found myself in Judge Martinez's chambers in Denver, surrounded by law books and the weight of genuine justice. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across files marked confidential that covered her desk. 28 HOAs across Colorado, Utah, and New Mexico, she explained, spreading out a map dotted with red pins, all displaying identical patterns of targeting military families. Same escalation tactics, same financial pressure campaigns, same forced sales below market value. My hands trembled slightly as she showed me federal subpoenas already issued for financial records from Blackwood Properties, and 36 similar operations. The scope was staggering. Hundreds of veteran families systematically driven from their homes. The fascinating aspect of your situation, David, is the timing. We've been building this case for months, but we needed someone still actively resisting, someone with evidence and the courage to wear a wire. A wire, federal witness protection, RICO charges for racketeering. The legal terminology swirled around me like debris in a hurricane. But one fact cut through the confusion. I wasn't losing my mind. This wasn't normal HOA bureaucracy. It was organized criminal conspiracy. Patricia's operation has generated approximately $3.1 million in profits from forced veteran property sales over 4 years, Judge Martinez continued, her finger tracing financial documents that made my stomach clench. Email chains between her and associates in 7 states discuss clearing out military problems and upgrading neighborhood demographics. The smoking gun was an email thread titled Operation Mountain Sweep that read like something from a 1960s segregation manual. Patricia and her network had developed a systematic playbook for targeting veteran families, identify military backgrounds through public records, manufacture violations using fraudulent inspectors, escalate financial pressure through compounding fines, then acquire properties through shell companies at below-market prices. Your midnight surveillance footage was the missing piece, Judge Martinez explained. Combined with the discriminatory statements you recorded at yesterday's meeting, we have sufficient evidence for federal civil rights charges, mail fraud, and RICO conspiracy. But here's what made my pulse race. They wanted me to continue fighting publicly while federal agents worked behind the scenes, continue appearing vulnerable. Let Patricia think she's winning. We need her to escalate further. The more desperate she becomes, the more evidence she'll create. She handed me a business card for Assistant U.S. Attorney Kenneth Morrison. Call him Monday. He'll explain how federal witness protection works and what we need from you over the next few weeks. As I drove back toward Clearwater Springs, the Colorado landscape looked different through my windshield. Those mountains weren't just beautiful anymore. They were concealing a federal investigation that would expose corruption across 4 states. The scattered cabins and small towns weren't just rural communities. They were evidence in a case that could reshape how HOAs operate nationwide. My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. How did the meeting go? I smiled for the first time in months. Better than expected. Much better. That night, as owls called across Clearwater Springs, and the twins practiced guitar in their loft rooms, I sat on my uncle's handmade porch swing, watching sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. The same property Patricia wanted to fine me into bankruptcy over. Tomorrow I'd put on a performance, act defeated, desperate, ready to surrender. But tonight, I was just a veteran who'd found allies with the power to fight back against systematic discrimination. The federal government was about to remind Patricia Blackwood that some battles are bigger than HOA bylaws. Monday morning at the Denver Federal Building felt like entering a different universe. Marble hallways echoed with the footsteps of serious people conducting serious business, and the smell of industrial-strength coffee mixed with the weight of federal authority. Assistant U.S. Attorney Kenneth Morrison looked like he could prosecute a mob boss and teach constitutional law on the same day. His office walls were covered with commendations, photographs with governors, and a framed newspaper headline, "Federal Prosecutor Breaks Massive Real Estate Fraud Ring." "Mr. Chen, you're about to become part of the largest HOA corruption investigation in U.S. history," he said, sliding a thick folder across his desk. Operation Mountain Sweep, we borrowed Patricia's own terminology, involves 52 defendants across 7 states. The scope was breathtaking. FBI financial crimes agents had been tracking money laundering through real estate transactions for 10 months. Civil rights investigators were documenting systematic discrimination against protected classes. Even the IRS was involved, pursuing tax evasion charges on unreported profits from forced property sales. "Your role is crucial," Morrison continued. "We need Patricia to escalate her harassment, while federal surveillance documents every violation. Think of yourself as bait in a very sophisticated trap." The technical setup was like something from a Hollywood thriller. FBI electronics specialists fitted me with a recording device so small it looked like a shirt button. Hidden cameras were installed around my property using a fake cable maintenance crew. Even I couldn't spot them once they were positioned. Agent Jennifer Kim from the Financial Crimes Unit explained how they'd been tracking Patricia's money trail. Bank records showed systematic patterns. HOA fines collected through shell companies, property purchases made through limited liability corporations, profits laundered through multiple real estate transactions. "She's been careful, but not careful enough," Agent Kim said, pointing to spreadsheets that looked like evidence of organized crime. "The same LLC that collects your fines owns the company that wants to purchase your property at below market value. That's textbook racketeering." My job was deceptively simple. Continue acting like a desperate homeowner fighting a losing battle while federal agents gathered final evidence. Every conversation with Patricia would be recorded. Every harassment incident would be documented by professional surveillance teams. Every financial transaction would be tracked through federal banking monitors. But I wasn't really alone anymore. The community network Frank had quietly built over months was more extensive than I'd realized. Paul's military buddies from 3 wars had been watching, waiting, documenting Patricia's discrimination campaign with the patience of career soldiers. Vietnam veteran Chuck Garcia had been keeping detailed logs of every suspicious HOA enforcement action for 3 years. Career veteran Bill Patterson had photographed Patricia's midnight surveillance activities using night vision equipment from his security business. Even Gulf War veteran Linda Foster had been secretly recording HOA meetings on a device her daughter bought her. "We've all been waiting for someone with the courage to fight back publicly," Chuck told me over dinner at his kitchen table, the aroma of his wife's tamales mixing with the serious business of building a federal case. "Paul died fighting these criminals alone. You're not going to." The legal strategy was elegant in its complexity. RICO charges would dismantle Patricia's entire network, allowing federal seizure of all assets gained through criminal enterprise. Civil rights violations carried mandatory minimum sentences that would put conspirators in federal prison for years. Mail fraud charges, using postal service to deliver intimidating legal documents based on fabricated claims, added additional federal jurisdiction. Morrison had explained something crucial during our meeting. Federal civil rights laws protect veterans as a class in housing discrimination cases. Every time Patricia targeted a military family for harassment, she was violating laws that supersede any HOA authority. "Here's what most people don't understand about fighting HOAs," Morrison said, leaning back in his chair with the confidence of someone who'd prosecuted real criminals. "When they cross into civil rights violations, they lose all legal protection. Discriminatory enforcement based on military status is a federal crime, period. The technical evidence gathering was already paying dividends. Forensic accountants had traced $520,000 in profits from forced veteran property sales directly into Patricia's personal accounts. Digital forensics teams had recovered email conversations discussing clearing out military problems from servers Patricia thought were secure. Even local law enforcement was coordinating with federal agents. Sheriff Garcia, no relation to Chuck, had been quietly documenting complaints about HOA harassment for months, building a file that federal prosecutors could use to show systematic abuse of authority. My cabin had become the center of a federal operation involving dozens of agents, prosecutors, and investigators. Motion sensors monitored every approach to the property. Digital recording equipment captured conversations from hundreds of feet away. Emergency response teams were positioned to intervene if Patricia's harassment escalated into actual violence. But the most important element was timing. Federal prosecutors needed Patricia to escalate her campaign into clearly criminal behavior while maintaining plausible deniability about federal involvement. Let her think she's winning, Morrison had advised. Desperate people make mistakes, and mistakes create evidence. Time to give Patricia enough rope to hang herself. Playing the defeated homeowner was harder than I'd anticipated. Every instinct screamed to fight back when Patricia escalated her harassment, but federal prosecutors needed her to cross clear criminal lines while surveillance teams documented everything. The first escalation came on a Wednesday night around 10:30 p.m. I was reviewing federal case files in my living room when the water stopped flowing. Not just my cabin, the entire north end of the valley went dry. Emergency reserves kicked in, but barely provided enough pressure for basic needs. By morning, I discovered the problem. Someone had deliberately damaged the main water line, feeding 6 veteran-owned properties. The sabotage was surgical, precise, not random vandalism, but targeted infrastructure attack designed to look like equipment failure. The utility company's repair estimate made my chest tighten. $1,400 emergency service fee, plus another $900 for upgraded safety equipment required after suspicious damage. But here's what made my blood boil. Patricia's property, just 75 yards away, never lost water pressure. Federal surveillance cameras had captured everything in crystal-clear high definition. Mike approaching the utility access with a pipe wrench at 2:23 a.m. Patricia's black Mercedes idling nearby with headlights off. Even the conversation where she directed him to make it look like old infrastructure failure. Agent Kim called that afternoon. Beautiful work from their perspective. Sabotage disguised as infrastructure problems, targeting only military families. From our perspective, destruction of federal property since water lines cross interstate commerce boundaries. But Patricia wasn't finished with infrastructure warfare. 4 days later, my electrical service mysteriously failed during the night. I woke to complete darkness and discovered the main line had been severed exactly where Mike had been inspecting the previous week under the guise of checking for utility easement violations. The emergency electrician arrived at dawn, his boots crunching through frost that smelled like mountain pine and desperation. "Strangest thing," he said, examining the damaged line. "Looks like someone took bolt cutters to your main feed, but they were strategic. Cut it right where the repair would be most expensive. $300 for emergency service, another $900 for excavation and replacement, plus generator costs while the work was completed." The financial pressure was mounting exactly as Patricia had planned, except federal agents were documenting every act of sabotage with the kind of precision that would make prosecutors smile in court. Meanwhile, Patricia's psychological warfare campaign intensified. Anonymous flyers appeared throughout the neighborhood, featuring grainy photos of me with text asking, "Do you feel safe with unstable veterans in our community?" The cheap paper and blurred printing suggested desperate, late-night production sessions. My mailbox got vandalized twice more. First with "Troublemaker" spray-painted in red letters, then with "Go Home" scrawled in what looked suspiciously like Mike's handwriting. Handwriting federal document analysts were already examining from his fraudulent inspection reports. Social media attacks started appearing on local Facebook groups. Fake accounts with stock photo profiles spread rumors about my aggressive behavior at community meetings, my suspicious late-night activities, and concerns about my stability based on my military background. But the most disturbing escalation was the business pressure campaign. Patricia's real estate connections started contacting local contractors, warning them about working with difficult homeowners. who might not pay their bills or could become litigation problems. 3 suppliers suddenly required cash payment instead of extending credit. The lumberyard owner, a Gulf War veteran himself, quietly told me that someone had been asking questions about my purchasing patterns, trying to build a case that I was stockpiling materials for unknown purposes. The federal response was swift and invisible. FBI financial crimes investigators began tracing the fake social media accounts back to their sources. Civil rights enforcement teams documented how the business pressure campaign constituted systematic economic harassment based on military status. Even the U.S. Postal Service got involved, since using mail to deliver intimidating materials based on fabricated claims fell under federal mail fraud statutes. Agent Kim called with updates that made me smile despite the harassment. She's checking every box in the federal racketeering manual: conspiracy, civil rights violations, destruction of property, mail fraud, even wire fraud for the fake social media campaign. We could teach a law school seminar using her tactics as examples of what not to do, but the psychological toll on my family was becoming serious. The twins started having nightmares about strangers breaking into our cabin. Lisa flinched every time a car door slammed in our driveway. The peaceful retreat we'd planned had become a combat zone where federal agents were the only thing standing between us and escalating criminal harassment. The most chilling moment came when I discovered fresh tire tracks around our cabin after a night when we'd been visiting Lisa's parents in town. Someone had driven the perimeter of our property, testing doors and windows, leaving muddy evidence of their surveillance in the soft earth around our foundation. Federal agents had photographs of the intruder, Patricia herself conducting late-night reconnaissance for what prosecutors suspected would be her final desperate gambit. The endgame began with a conversation federal wiretaps captured between Patricia and Mike on Friday evening. Agent Kim played me the recording over a secure phone line, her voice tight with anticipation. "We need direct evidence of his instability," Patricia's voice crackled through the speaker. "Something that proves he's a danger to the community. Then we can justify emergency removal proceedings." Mike's nervous response was barely audible. "What kind of evidence?" "The kind that makes judges sign restraining orders and forces immediate property sales." Federal prosecutors had been waiting months for this moment. Clear evidence of conspiracy to plant fabricated evidence. Morrison's team immediately sought authorization for what they called controlled criminal activity documentation. Translation: let Patricia commit federal crimes while recording everything. I played my part perfectly, making sure neighborhood sources overheard me telling Lisa I'd be driving to Denver for legal consultations that weekend. The truth was more complex. I'd be meeting with federal prosecutors, while surveillance teams positioned around my cabin documented whatever criminal activity Patricia had planned. Friday afternoon, I made a show of loading an overnight bag into my truck, loudly mentioning to Tom Williams that I'd be gone until Sunday evening. Tom, who'd been quietly helping federal agents by reporting Patricia's activities, nodded sympathetically and wished me luck with my lawyer meetings. The drive to Denver felt surreal. Colorado's late autumn landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, mountains painted in gold and copper, while federal agents maintained discreet surveillance of my cabin 75 miles away. My phone displayed a live security feed showing the peaceful valley where federal justice was about to unfold. Saturday morning in Judge Martinez's chambers, I watched real-time surveillance footage on a secure federal monitor. Patricia's black Mercedes appeared on camera at 11:52 a.m., parking behind a grove of aspen trees where she thought she'd be hidden. Mike's pickup truck followed 20 minutes later, loaded with what looked like construction equipment. "She's been planning this for weeks," Agent Kim whispered, adjusting the audio pickup to capture their conversation. "We've got wiretaps showing her purchasing fake drug paraphernalia and printing literature designed to make you look like an extremist." The break-in unfolded like a crime thriller. Mike approached my back door with professional lock-picking tools while Patricia served as lookout, constantly scanning the empty neighborhood. Federal cameras captured every detail: Mike's nervous sweating, Patricia's aggressive hand signals, the careful way they avoided leaving fingerprints on door handles. Judge Martinez leaned forward as Mike forced the lock. 32 years on the federal bench, and I've never watched criminals create evidence for their own prosecution in real time. Inside my cabin, Patricia and Mike worked with practiced efficiency. Federal surveillance showed them planting items throughout my property, fake extremist literature in my bedroom closet, counterfeit drug paraphernalia in my workshop, even forged documents suggesting I'd been making threats against HOA board members. But their biggest mistake was the conversation federal microphones captured while they worked. "Once we photograph this evidence tomorrow," Patricia whispered, unaware that federal agents were recording every word, "emergency restraining orders will force immediate property seizure. The Garcia family will see what happens to troublemakers and accept our offer voluntarily." Mike's response sealed their fate. "What about the other veterans, the ones who haven't caused problems yet?" "Same treatment," Patricia replied coldly. "Military people don't belong in family neighborhoods. We're providing a service, cleaning up communities one property at a time." Federal agents had captured systematic civil rights conspiracy in high-definition audio and video. The arrest happened as they finished planting evidence. FBI agents moved in with military precision, surrounding my cabin as Patricia and Mike emerged through the back door, carrying the tools of their trade. Agent Kim called me with barely contained excitement. "Perfect execution. We've got them on breaking and entering, conspiracy to commit civil rights violations, evidence tampering, and about 7 other federal charges. Plus, everything we collected shows systematic racketeering across state lines." Judge Martinez was watching the live arrest feed over my shoulder, her expression mixing satisfaction with professional concern. "Mr. Chen, you've just helped us document one of the clearest cases of civil rights conspiracy I've seen in 3 decades on the federal bench." But the story was far from over. Federal agents had seized Patricia's phone during the arrest, uncovering a network of similar operations across 7 states. Bank records revealed money laundering through dozens of real estate transactions. Email servers contained evidence of systematic targeting of military families dating back 6 years. Mike broke within hours, offering complete cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. His testimony revealed the scope of Patricia's network: 51 HOAs using identical tactics, over 300 veteran families systematically harassed from their homes, millions in illegal profits laundered through shell companies. As I drove back toward Clearwater Springs that evening, knowing Patricia was spending her first night in federal custody, the Colorado sunset looked different through my windshield. Justice wasn't just an abstract concept anymore. It was federal agents with badges, prosecutors with subpoenas, and a legal system that finally had enough evidence to protect families like mine. Tomorrow would bring media attention, community reckoning, and the beginning of real change for HOAs nationwide. The federal courthouse steps in Denver had never seen a crowd like this. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward a crystal-clear Colorado sky that seemed to promise justice. The smell of exhaust from idling trucks mixed with the crisp December air as reporters from CNN, Fox News, and 4 major networks prepared for what U.S. Attorney Morrison had promised would be a landmark announcement in civil rights enforcement. I stood beside Judge Martinez, still processing that less than 72 hours ago, I'd been a struggling homeowner fighting an HOA. Now, I was the key witness in what federal prosecutors were calling the largest coordinated housing discrimination case in American history. Morrison approached the podium with the confidence of someone who'd spent months building an airtight case. Behind him, Agent Kim held a thick folder containing evidence that would reshape how HOAs operate nationwide. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morrison began, his voice carrying clearly through the courthouse plaza, "today we announce a 52-count federal indictment against Patricia Blackwood and 14 co-conspirators for systematic civil rights violations, racketeering, and conspiracy to defraud military families of their constitutional housing rights." The crowd of reporters erupted with shouted questions, cameras flashing like strobe lights against the courthouse's granite facade. But Morrison wasn't finished delivering the hammer blows. "Operation Mountain Sweep has uncovered a criminal network spanning 7 states, targeting over 300 veteran families for systematic harassment and financial exploitation. The defendants generated approximately $3.1 million in illegal profits by forcing below-market property sales through fabricated violations and discriminatory enforcement." Behind the media scrum, I spotted familiar faces from Clearwater Springs. Tom Williams had driven up with Margaret Foster, and several other neighbors who'd quietly supported my fight. Even Frank was there, his eyes bright with the satisfaction of seeing Paul's memory vindicated. But the most satisfying sight was the federal prisoner transport van parked behind the courthouse, its tinted windows hiding Patricia during what would be her only public appearance in an orange jumpsuit. Morrison continued with prosecutorial precision. Evidence includes recorded conversations where defendants explicitly discuss targeting military problems and upgrading neighborhood demographics. We have documented over 600 instances of fabricated violations, fake inspections conducted by unlicensed personnel, and systematic financial harassment based solely on veterans' military service. A reporter from the Washington Post shouted a question that cut through the morning air. What message does this send to other HOAs engaging in similar practices? Morrison's smile was sharp as a blade. Federal civil rights laws supersede any HOA authority. Discriminatory enforcement based on military status is a federal crime with no statute of limitations. Your financial records are public, your emails can be subpoenaed, and veterans have friends in very high places. The crowd murmured appreciatively, but Judge Martinez stepped forward to add the judicial perspective that would make headlines nationwide. For 32 years on the federal bench, I've seen civil rights violations disguised as bureaucratic procedure, she said, her voice carrying the weight of legal precedent. This case demonstrates that systematic housing discrimination will be prosecuted with the full force of federal law, regardless of how it's disguised or justified. A CNN correspondent asked about the broader implications, and Morrison delivered what prosecutors would later call the mic drop moment of the press conference. To HOA board members watching this coverage, we've identified 1,240 similar complaints nationwide. Federal investigators are reviewing patterns of discriminatory enforcement in 28 states. If you're systematically targeting military families, protected minorities, or anyone based on class membership rather than legitimate rule violations, we will find you, we will prosecute you, and we will seize every asset you gained through civil rights violations. The courthouse steps erupted with camera flashes and shouted follow-up questions, but the legal thunder had already rolled across America. Social media exploded with Cho accountability hashtags. Local news stations began investigating their own communities' HOA practices. Law firms specializing in civil rights announced they were reviewing similar cases in dozens of states. Behind the media frenzy, the human cost was finally being acknowledged. Robert Martinez, the Afghanistan veteran, who'd been forced to sell his property for $220,000, stood with tears in his eyes as Morrison announced that federal restitution would recover his losses, plus damages for emotional distress. Every family that was targeted will receive full compensation, Morrison declared. Federal asset forfeiture has already seized $3.8 million from the defendants' accounts, properties, and business holdings. As the press conference concluded, I found myself surrounded by reporters asking for my reaction to seeing justice delivered. But the most important moment came when a young woman with a military spouse pin approached me quietly. "My husband's deployed, and our HOA has been threatening us with violations that don't exist," she whispered. "Who do I call?" I handed her Agent Kim's business card. "The federal government is listening now," I said. "You're not fighting alone anymore." The Colorado wind carried our voices across the courthouse plaza, where justice had finally found its voice loud enough to be heard from sea to shining sea. 7 months after Patricia's arrest made national headlines, Clearwater Springs had transformed into something that would have made my uncle weep with pride. A genuine community where the smell of barbecue smoke mixed with laughter instead of whispered fears. Patricia received 22 years in federal prison and $3.8 million in restitution orders that will follow her until her dying breath. Mike, who sang like a canary to federal investigators, got 4 years and became the star witness in prosecutions across 5 states. His testimony helped break up similar discrimination rings from Utah to New Mexico, protecting over 500 military families from the systematic harassment we'd endured. But here's what really mattered. Watching the twins sleep peacefully again, no longer jolting awake at car doors slamming in our driveway, seeing Lisa's shoulders relax as she worked in our garden, the constant tension finally melting away like spring snow. Our family had survived a federal case, but more importantly, we'd reclaimed our home. The financial justice was swift and complete. Federal asset forfeiture seized everything. Patricia's real estate empire, her personal properties, even that black Mercedes she'd used for midnight surveillance. Every targeted family received full restitution, plus emotional damages. Robert Martinez bought a beautiful mountain cabin with his $220,000 recovery, joking that Patricia had accidentally given him the retirement home of his dreams. The new HOA board, with me as unanimously elected president, implemented governance so transparent it could be seen from orbit. Every meeting streamed live online. Independent auditors reviewed our books quarterly. Most crucially, we enshrined anti-discrimination protections that would prevent anyone from ever again being targeted for their military service, race, or background. Property values exploded as national media coverage attracted families who wanted neighbors that fought for justice. Young military couples started choosing Clearwater Springs specifically because they'd heard about our stand against discrimination. What Patricia had tried to poison through hatred, we'd purified through inclusion. The healing culminated in our first Victory Day celebration, held annually on Patricia's arrest anniversary. The entire community gathered around tables where former enemies now shared the twins' homemade cookies and swapped hiking stories. The sound of children playing echoed off the same mountains where Patricia, once proud with her clipboard of manufactured violations. But the crown jewel was our Clearwater Springs Veterans Scholarship. Funded by federal restitution and powered by community love, we provide full college scholarships for military children who faced housing discrimination anywhere in America. Last month, I handed a scholarship check to Carlos Rivera, whose Marine father had been harassed out of 4 different communities before finding sanctuary with us. Watching his tears of gratitude, I felt my uncle's spirit smiling from that handmade porch swing. Our case became the legal weapon that shattered HOA corruption nationwide. Federal prosecutors referenced our evidence in 68 similar prosecutions. Law schools teach our story as the gold standard for civil rights enforcement. Even HBO's documentary introduced millions to the reality of systematic housing discrimination disguised as community standards. The Department of Justice asked me to help draft national HOA oversight legislation that's already passed in 18 states. Lisa and I now mentor families fighting similar battles, connecting them with federal resources that exist because we refuse to surrender. Every family that calls our hotline is another victory against the Patricias of the world. This morning, I sit on my uncle's restored porch swing, steam rising from coffee that tastes like freedom. Eagles soar over peaks so clear they reflect every cloud, every possibility. The property that nearly cost me everything now hosts community fishing tournaments where veterans teach neighborhood children to cast lines and tell stories about courage under pressure. The cabin's log walls, weathered and strong, shelter a retreat center where military families find healing among neighbors who understand that service creates bonds stronger than any HOA bylaw. The creaking sound of old wood under boots now sounds like victory instead of violation. Justice took time, took courage, took people willing to stand up and say enough, but it came wrapped in federal badges and delivered with constitutional authority. Your HOA nightmare could be someone else's federal case. Drop a comment sharing your worst experience. You might be surprised how many laws they broke, and your story could help another family find justice. Hit that subscribe button for HOA stories and ring that bell because next week I'm covering the mayor who tried to steal an entire veterans memorial and how one Gold Star mother armed with public records brought down City Hall. Another day, another HOA drama wrapped up. If this story made you shake your head or fist pump in victory, smash that like button, share your own HOA experience below, and subscribe so you'll never miss another battle for justice.